By this point in the course, we've covered almost all of the features that the ASP.NET MVC framework offers, or at least the features that you will use in just about any website that you develop. In other words, we've got our site up and running. Now, it's time to make it better. In this chapter, I'll talk a little bit about how to optimize your website's performance to ensure that your site's visitors get the best possible experience that you can deliver. In this video, I'll give you a brief overview of what it means to optimize website performance. Then, over the next few videos, I'll dive into each concept and show you how ASP.NET MVC gives you the tools you need to do so. There are three primary players involved in displaying a web page to a user: the server, or your application, the client, aka the browser, and the network connection between the two, which we'll just refer to as the internet. And from a performance standpoint, these three players are each responsible for one primary thing. The server is responsible for responding to a request as fast as possible. The client is responsible for rendering a page as fast as possible, which includes retrieving everything that it needs from the server in order to render that page, such as images and style sheets. Finally, the internet is responsible for getting the server's response to the client as fast as possible, and vice versa. Performance issues arising from any one of these players can have a very negative effect on your website's performance. Performance issues arising from more than one of these players can be devastating. Unfortunately, we as website developers have no direct control over the internet, so there is little we can do there except to avoid it whenever we can. This means sending the fewest requests and as little data as possible between the client and the server. That's about all we're going to say about the internet, but be sure to remember that rule because it will be a recurring theme throughout this chapter. There's a lot that you can do to optimize the client experience, but much of it is very specific to the actual HTML that is sent to the user and the way that that HTML is formed. Unfortunately, even though there are several ways in which the server can help optimize what gets sent to the browser, such as content bundling and minification, and we'll be discussing those techniques, this is a course on ASP.NET MVC, which is a server-side framework. So, dealing with many of the issues you'll face on the client is outside of the scope of this course. For more information on how to deal with client-side issues, check out some of our other courses on client-side web development here in the lynda.com online training library. Putting aside the role that the internet and the browser play in website performance for now, let's move on to evaluate what kinds of performance issues we might be able to address on the server. To optimize the server's role in web performance, we must first consider what its typical duties are. Generally speaking, the most common tasks a web server performs are interacting with a database, or retrieving and storing data, logic and data manipulation, and rendering HTML that gets sent to the browser. While all three of these tasks can become a bottleneck, the most common source of performance problems by far is the first one, interacting with a database. In this chapter, we'll address the issue of interacting with a database in two ways. The first way is storing data for a period of time to avoid having to retrieve or process it again, also known as caching. We'll focus a great deal on caching over the next two videos, caching as much as we can wherever we can. Everything from the raw data that we retrieve from the database to fully rendered pages to even small chunks of a page. The second approach is executing database interactions on a separate thread. While this doesn't necessarily decrease the response time for each individual request, it does help the server accept a greater number of requests at once by keeping the request from blocking other requests from coming in while we process it. While this doesn't necessarily decrease the response time for an individual request, it does help the server accept a greater number of requests at once by keeping the database request from blocking other users while we process it. In this video, I gave a very high-level overview of the concepts of website optimization. Over the next few videos, I'll show you how to apply these concepts to your ASP.NET MVC application to help it perform as best as it can.